Good morning and welcome to our second session on the Recorder's Day. This class is our certification for GRAMA prep class. Just a reminder, if you haven't retaken your test and your certification is now overdue, that you need to get that done. There's quite a few people on the list when you go to the website that are past due on their certification. So if you remember, in the past, we've had a gentleman from Logan who sent that information out statewide about those that were past due. Well, Colleen Mulvey is going to be the presenter of this session. Let me tell you a little bit about Colleen, and most of you know her. Colleen has spent the past 8 years of her career as the city recorder for the city of Cedar Hills, where she developed a zeal for records management with a special interest in GRAMA processes and requirements. Since 2011, she has spearheaded the efforts in creating and providing members of the Utah Municipal Clerks Association with a detailed election checklist. Colleen is a master municipal clerk and currently serves on the Utah Municipal Clerks Association board as vice president. She also serves on the ARMA board, Utah Salt Lake chapter board, as public affairs director, and participates as a mentor for the International Institute of Municipal Clerks mentoring program. She began her career in government in 2006 as deputy recorder in the Utah County Recorder's Office, and then as a municipal clerk in 2009. Colleen is going to take over from here, but first of all, let me remind you to mute your devices, and if you have questions, there's a chat you can use or type it in, and probably towards the end we'll open it up for questions where you can speak. We'll turn the time over to Colleen.
Okay, great. Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Okay, we're good. Unmute. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, good. Okay, well, welcome. Appreciate this opportunity to, hold on, we got echo going on here. Appreciate this opportunity to present on this topic that I know a bunch about. I'm not the know-all expert, but I'm going to go through basically what is going to be on the certification test to help you kind of guide you through. I'm not going to go through every single detail because there's a lot of information. GRAMA is like a very complex law, lots of rules, there's lots of gray areas and things like that. So I'm just going to go over the basics, but I do want this to be interactive. If I'm talking about something that you have a question, put it in the chat and let's talk about it right when we're going over that subject so that you know, we all stay on the same page. What I wanted to do just to start off with is I did a little bit of research on the history of GRAMA and why we have to do what we do with these open records requests and that. So it's actually basically referred to almost everywhere in the world as the Freedom of Information Act. And the way it started in the US was a California congressman in the 50s during the Cold War wanted to get some information because President Dwight D. Eisenhower fired several thousand federal employees accused of being communists. And so he asked to see the records associated with the dismissals, and that administration refused to hand them over. So he started on a career to have government be a little bit more open. And so he chaired a committee and got everything going. And so the Freedom of Information Act was signed into law in 1967. So it's been around for a while. And again, we call it GRAMA because that's what it's called in our state. But Freedom of Information Act is what applies to the federal government. Each state government has a different law or requirement, and a lot of them call them sunshine laws. So I looked up, and on this lovely website I found, it has links to every single state in the United States on their Open Records Act or their Sunshine Law. Like you'll see, Utah calls it Government Records Access and Management Plan. So it's called by several different things, but it's basically the same concept is records are open to the public unless they're classified otherwise. So I just wanted to let you know that the laws for GRAMA do change with legislative sessions. Not always, because our legislators are not too thrilled about changing GRAMA laws very often. But there's a lot of resources out there. And one of the best resources is the Utah State Archives. And that's actually where we as certified records officers have to take our test, and our online test is through their website. So there's a lot of information there. They have videos and training manuals and all sorts of things. Plus they also have the Government Records Ombudsman, Rosemary Cundiff, who's there to help anybody who wants to make a GRAMA request or anybody who's not sure how to answer a GRAMA request. She's there just to give advice and point you in the right direction in the law. And also she provides mediation service between you and your requester if you're not agreeing with each other and you'd rather do mediation instead of ending up at the State Records Committee at a hearing. There's also a government records management specialist for local government. It's Heidi Steed, who works for the archives. So there's a lot of help out there. And then of course, your fellow clerks and recorders. I know there's also elected officials and city managers and probably treasurers and police departments, lots of records people out there, not just clerks or recorders. So basically, in Utah, we have the GRAMA law, but there's also a lot of other ways people can get information. There's this website here that's called open.utah.gov, where anybody from the public can access laws, public records, financial reports, and things like that. So there's a lot of information out there, and that's probably a lot of reason why there's a lot more GRAMA requests these days, because there's so much more out there for the public to read. Okay, so anyway, enough about public information. Let's start talking about what is going to be on this test. There's actually 2 online tests that you can take. One is the GRAMA Essentials, and that basically helps you, guide you through so you have the information you need to respond to requests correctly. And you can see on their website, it shows they have training videos, they have training material. The other certification test is a Records Management Essentials test. So you don't have to take both. You only have to do one per year if you are the designated certified records officer for your city or entity. And you have to score 75% or higher. And this is all mandated by law. And you also have to take the test online because it's, that's what it says in the law. So if you go through and you go on this website, and you have to excuse me because I have a ton of notes, so I'm not going to be looking at the screen. I'm going to be looking at my notes. There's 6 modules. So there's a lot of information in this training material. And so we're not going to go over step by step by step because it's just a lot. And I'm going to this will probably be the only time I read straight from the code, but just so you know, this is what the legislator intended for us public records officers. They intend to balance the public's right to access information about the conduct of public business with individuals' rights of privacy in relation to personal information that the government gathers about them. It also recognizes the need for government to restrict certain records for the public good. So that's basically their intent. So it does give us options to, you know, be the one who judges or decides how we're going to classify a record. And we're going to go into classification a little bit different, but just know that on this part of the test, it'll probably ask you something about what is the legislative intent. Oh, another thing I want to say about the test, when you take it, it's open book. So you don't have to, you know, it's not timed. You just take it online and you can have your materials out and be reading them and searching them because they want us to know this information. They want us to pass it. So just know that. The next part of module 1 is definitions. So there will be some questions that ask you, what's a record or what's an individual or whatever. Their tests vary. I think they have 4 or 5 of them out there. So, you know, you could take a test next to somebody and they could have similar questions, but not the same. So just read through and know your definitions. And again, this is open book. So you don't have to memorize everything because there's a lot of information in there to memorize. The second part of this module 1, it's records of security measure, which are not subject to GRAMA. And these are a few examples: security plans, passwords, combinations, building and public works designs, and that. I have actually gotten several requests from the public, like they want to know where the wells are, where sewer lines are, and things like that. And that type of information is very protected. So be careful because there's several things that cities, counties, towns need to keep secure. It's not public information. Disclosure of records subject to federal law. So there's a couple of examples where you have to do it. It's like the HIPAA, the health insurance, and there's another one called FERPA, family education, and that. And again, you're going to find these definitions in the training materials. I don't want to, you know, spend all of this time going over every single definition because they're in there and there's a lot of them. Certification of records officers. We talked about that a little bit, that you have to certify every year. And like Annette said at the beginning, we were looking through the archives website because it shows who the certified records officer is. And it also shows it when they took their exam and when their next one's due. And it also says you're overdue. So if you haven't taken yours on time, and you will be getting email reminders to take them, but it does show out there that you have not completed it. And by law, GRAMA is law, we are supposed to do this once a year. Okay, so that's module 1 really quick in a nutshell. Let's move on to this section here. And this one's a really important one because this one is actually responding to a request. There's a question?
When's the test due? When's the test due?
Well, so if you've never taken the test, so somebody asked, when's the test due? So I'll use myself as an example. I took my test, yearly test, like November 7th of last year. So I have to, by November 7th of this year, take it. So you get a 1-year lapse. So if you're new, you need to go in and you need to take it now. And then once you pass it, then a year goes by. And again, you'll be in the system. So you do get a reminder from the archives that says, hey, it's time to take your test. If you don't get one, then keep track of yourself, because there are government watchdog people out there who every once in a while will go on this website and then start making a known that we're not taking our tests.
How do they check if they've got certification?
How do they check in on the website?
So,
It's on the state archives website, and you would go under certified records officer and just click around in there and it'll just list them by city. So just the Utah State Archives,
can they go to their dashboard?
their dashboard.
You sign into the stuff and
Yeah.
show it
If you cannot find it that way, if you're a local government, get in touch with Heidi Steed at the archives, because she's over local government and she'll be happy to pull it up and just make sure they have the correct email for you. And that, because if you're not getting their notices, then they probably don't have you on their email list, because they also send out email blasts about their trainings and things like that. So if you're not getting those, they may not have your current information. And they are the go-to people for all of this, because they are the ones who are the stewards of the retention schedules, unless your city's adopted your own and that. So they are the go-to. So you really do need to get in touch and make sure they have your current information. Okay, so on a records request, I'm going back to access to records unless there's any other questions right now. No, we're good. Okay. So a request has to be written. It does not have to go on a GRAMA request form. It just has to be written, and it has to have the name, address, phone number, and the description being, reasonably specific of what the requester is asking for. So if somebody emails you and they have their name, their address, their phone number, and the record that they want, then that's a GRAMA request. You don't have to say, oh, you have to fill out our GRAMA form. I mean, it's nice to have everything uniform, but you don't have to. It just has to be a written request. And then there's also, and Dylan from the archives will be talking about this later today, how the open records portal works, because that's another way we get GRAMA requests, is people can go on there. So if you're not registered with them correctly, you may not be getting their GRAMA requests, which may or may not be a good thing. I don't know. So anyway, does not have to be on your city's GRAMA request form. Processing and answering a GRAMA request. Okay, you have to answer a regular request no more than 10 business days. You have to respond, actually. And when I say respond, that means you don't necessarily have to have all of the records they're asking for. You just have to get back and respond to them within 10 business days. So business days means days that your office works. So if you don't work on holidays or Saturdays and Sundays, those are not counted. If you only work Monday through Friday or Thursday, and Friday is not a work day, that Friday is not counted. So business days. If it is an expedited request, then it's 5 business days. Then there is another category. It's called extraordinary. Huh?
Sorry, there's another.
Okay. Let me do this question before we go on to extraordinary circumstances.
What if we only work a couple of days a week?
That's a really good question, because there's a lot of part-time people. If I was part-time, I would just, but is your office open? You might only work 3 days, but your office might be open 5 days. So it's business days. So I don't think you can get away with saying, well, I only work Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You have to go with business days that your office is open for business. Because like say for me, I'm not in the office today. So if I get a GRAMA request in like the open portal or whatever, the day that I open it is the day my clock starts ticking for my business days. But if you're not physically there, if you are the only person that handles it, then you just start your countdown on the day that you actually receive the request.
Their office is only open for 2 days a week.
Okay, then those are business days. And you probably need to make that really clear with who your requesters are. And that what I've found is, because for some reason, our city gets a lot of GRAMA requests. I get about at least 5 a week. But what I have found is, if you are working with somebody who is asking for a lot of things or whatever, talk to them, be in touch with them, let them know your circumstances and that, so that they know that you are working on it and you're not ignoring them, or you're not trying to not fulfill the request. We good?
5 or 10 days to acknowledge the request, or 5 or 10 days to fulfill the
Okay.
request. Some requests require extensive research and effort to respond.
Correct. That's a good question. So it is 10 days to respond for normal one, 5 days to respond for a expedited, which means you just have to tell the requester, because there's going to be times they're going to owe fees and things like that. So just respond to them within that amount of time. And I'm going to show you, I have in this presentation some examples of how to respond. So let's go, and we'll talk about that more too when we could get to the fees, and I'll show you other things. But this next, this last bullet point, the extraordinary circumstances, that's when you have a huge request or things like that. Basically, every time I've had extraordinary circumstances is because the requester is asking for a ton of information. Like, I need all the emails from the mayor and the city council for the last 6 months. Well, that's a lot of emails. So you can tell them that, and right here is the exact wording that I use is, we anticipate your request require the city to review a large number of documents to locate the records requested. Accordingly, due to this extraordinary circumstance, the city will need an extension of time to comply with your request. And then I quote the numbers in the code. The city will require an extension of time to prepare the records after the estimated fee has been paid. So right here, city anticipates 2 additional weeks or whatever. So if you pretty much know how much time it's going to take, then let them know. Otherwise, just, you can kind of be vague about it. A lot of times I've had these huge requests and I've gotten back to respond, just telling them, hey, you know, this is a lot of records. Can you be more specific? Is there a certain topic you're looking for, or something like that could help narrow down the amount of records you're going to need to pull or whatever. So it's good to stay in touch with your requestor and just let them know. But within 10 days or 5 days, depending on the type of the request, all you have to do is respond and just let them know, hey, I got this, and this is what we think it's going to take. Okay, so, and I'll give you some more examples when we get into talking about fees, and that's in the part where we talk about denials and partial denials and things like that. Okay, so second part of module 2, we're talking about, where am I? I got lost. I have too many notes here, sorry. Okay, how to make a records request. We pretty much talked about all of that. They submit it to us. And then we need to, at the time they're asking for the record, figure out what they're asking for, and then we need to classify the records. And we're going to talk about classification in the next module, and we're going to cover this private, controlled, protected in a little bit more depth so we understand. But basically, a record does not have to be classified until it's asked for. So you don't have to go through every single record that you have and go write down a classification for it. You just know that when it comes in, you need to classify it. We'll go through all of that. Every record, government record, is considered public. Every single record, unless there's a reason in the law, in this GRAMA law, that says we can classify it as private, controlled, or protected. And we're going to go over those classifications in a few minutes, but just know that pretty much every record is public. And so the public knows that, and so that's all they hear is, well, every record is public. But there are things in the law that give us a little more control over what we can and cannot put out there. Okay, was that another question, or can I go on? Okay.
There was just a comment, it says you have to do more than just respond if you have the record, or if you don't have the record.
Correct. Okay. So you do have to do, if you have the record available, like I got one just the other day for a bunch of, they want the building permits. Well, we have those, we have them scanned. They're right there. All you have to do is just make sure they don't have any private information. So if you have it, just respond with the records. But what I'm talking about is if you have a huge request that you know is going to cause fees and things like that, then respond within that time, but you don't necessarily have to provide the records if it's going to take quite a while to fill it. So if you have the record, if it's immediate, then go ahead. Another thing too is, say for instance, somebody calls and says, I would like the audio to the city council meeting last week. Well, in my city, we keep it on the website. So you can just refer that person to your website or to wherever else that is. Like a lot of times people want land records. That's the Utah County Recorder's Office. So they're asking me, but it's not a record I have, but I can refer them somewhere else where that record is. But if it's on your website, you can refer them to your website.
Colleen, there's a question, what would you consider private information in a building permit? I think we're all getting
Okay,
a
yeah.
lot of those
Yeah,
requests.
because it's that same company right now that's data something or other, yeah. And you can't ignore those, you have to fill them. But what's considered private in a building permit is if it's a resident's address is not private, that's a public record. A resident's personal email address is private, and their personal phone number or cell phone number. The contractor information is public because contractors are in business. So basically when I do this request, I have them all scanned, but I have to go through, and if it's anybody who has put their personal email address and their personal phone number, I redact those out. So you have to be careful with that. But pretty much everything else is public. How much it cost, who the contractor is, the address where it's going in, what type of work.
What about their business license ID and their state contractor's license?
That's
number?
public information.
That's public.
Public business license and contractor, that's public information because you can go on public websites and find that. You can go Google them. Contractor information is public information because they're out there publicly doing business. Okay, so
What about the valuation of the property?
it's public information because you can go on the county website and get the valuation of the property. Same with how much the job is going to cost or whatever. So in that instance, pretty much the only thing that's private on a business license, or not a business license, a building permit, is the homeowner's personal email, homeowner's personal phone number. Okay, so on fees, it says that a city or entity may charge a reasonable fee to cover the cost for compiling, tailorizing, summarizing, blah, blah, blah. The first 15 minutes is free. So a lot of the documents I get asked for, I already have them electronically on my share drive. Like somebody will call up and say, or write in and say, I want the CCNRs for this homeowners association or this subdivision, and that those are already scanned. Those are public documents. So I can just automatically just email them within a few minutes. So that first 15 minutes is free. Fees are established through an ordinance or written policy. So your city entity has to have a written policy about what fees you're going to charge, and that needs to go on your fee schedule, which those are publicly published. On ours, we have how much it costs to make copies in that, but I'm pretty sure on our fee schedule it's set by the manager or something like that, because we don't want to have to change our dollar amount we charge for our GRAMA request every time somebody new gets hired or whatever. They do encourage us to fulfill GRAMA requests without charging because they're assuming releasing the record benefits the public. So first 15 minutes are free. Then you can start talking about fees. Fees come in if you know it's going to cost $50 or more. You can just get in touch with your requester and say, explain to them that in the law, it says if it's going to cost $50 or more, they need to pay it up front. And in a request, like my example of, I want the mayor and council's emails for 6 months. That's a lot of emails. I know that's going to take me more than 15 minutes. And it's going to cost more than $50. So what I do is I send out a email to them, and I explain the whole process. So here's an example of the wording that I use. I basically tell them we're willing to comply with the request, quote the GRAMA title and chapter, and then explain that where the estimated cost exceeds $50, you must pay the estimated cost before the city begins to gather the said records. And this is really important. If you know it's going to cost more than $50, don't go do all the work. Send them this verbiage. Tell them it's going to be over $50. And my next paragraph has an example of how you tell them that. But don't go do it, because if they're not willing to pay the price, then you're wasting your time pulling all those records. So make sure that your requester is clear that this is going to cost time and money for them. So an example in the next paragraph says, we estimate blah, blah, blah. It will take at least 3 hours. Cost will be at least $105. As set forth in the act, the city will begin to compile the records. You must pay the estimated cost. If the actual cost of compiling the records is less than, then you'll be returned, or if it's more, we'll stop at $105 worth, and then we'll go on. So basically, if this person is not willing to pay that $105 up front, I don't have to do anything. And so I follow back up and say, okay, I haven't heard from you. Did you want it? It's like, oh no, just forget about it. So then you can close that request. There's requester has another choice. They can appeal and say, I don't agree with that. And we're going to talk about denials and appeals in just a second. Are we good on questions? Okay. So, and then again, this PowerPoint that has these examples of this wording and stuff, it'll be available if anybody wants it. We probably put it on the Utah Clerks website as well, just for reference. All right, so denials. And a denial doesn't mean doesn't only mean you're denying the entire thing. It could be a partial denial. So say, for instance, you can give them part of it, but part of it you're not giving them, like you're redacting it out. So you always have to do, when you're denying it, a description of the reason why. Why are you denying this? Put the legal citation of the GRAMA code, and then you have to tell them they have the right to appeal. You have to give them the time limit for filing their appeal and the name of your chief administrative officer. And then this next slide will give you some information on and wording on how to do that. And another thing I wanted to point out here, if you fail to respond in time, or you don't respond to a GRAMA request at all, that's considered a denial, and that can be appealed. So here's an example of language when you're denying something. It just tells them, and I just take the wording straight out of the code, that they have the determination within, okay, any person aggrieved by a governmental entity's access determination may appeal the determination within 30 days. So they have 30 days, and then they have to appeal to your chief administrative officer. So pretty typically that's your city manager, or it could be every city set up different. So it could be some cases it's your mayor or whatever. So you have to tell them who the person is. And then the next sentence says that the appeal has to contain the following. So they have to make sure all of that is in there. If they do that, then, and I believe we go through some more of it later, but your chief administrative officer has so much time to respond to it and that. And here is if you get to this part too, where they're not agreeing with you, here's where you can use the state records ombudsman to do mediation and see if they can work out what's going on. Sometimes I've actually had the requester call Rosemary, and she has ended up telling them the exact same thing that I told them. And so then they believe me, and then they let it go. So sometimes just hearing it, the same exact answer, you know, because all we're doing is going straight what's out of the code, helps, because they say, oh, okay, well, I guess that's how it works, you know, because two people can't be lying, right? I don't know. But anyway, so even if you are just partially denying it, you still have to give them this information. So pretty much every time I redact something out of it, I always let them know, you know, if you don't agree with my determination, here's what you can do. Here's how you appeal. Okay, the next part of this module talks about sharing records. Records that are classified as private controlled protected can be shared with other government entities through written agreement. So that means, say for instance, a city recorder calls me and says, hey, we're doing like an RFQ for our garbage or whatever. Do you have an example or whatever? And so, sure, I can share my RFQ with you, but I need to let you know right now that such and such company has told me up front that this is protected information. So as long I'm sharing it with you, I do not make you fill out a GRAMA request form. Governments can share records, but I need to let you know how it's classified, and you have to respect that, because if you don't, then you know it's not respecting what the intent of this record was. And then subpoenas, they're not subject to GRAMA request. This is part of the judicial process and should not be responded to without the help of your legal counsel. And that's another thing I need to point out too, is if you have a GRAMA request that you know is going to be difficult and stressful, let your city manager know, or whoever you report to, like, hey, I'm going to be denying a lot of stuff on this request. And then also your city's legal counsel needs to know. The reason why is if they deny it, if you deny it and they appeal, guess who's going to be helping you out if you go to the state records committee? And it's not fun. It's very nerve-wracking, and it's like being in this little court. I've gone several times. So just make sure your legal counsel and whoever you report to are on board before you even answer your thing. If you're going to deny a whole bunch of stuff, it's better that they know, because they're going to be the ones that are involved in the appeal process. Okay, we can move on to module 3, the classification section. And classifying a record really means that you're determining whether the information, your record, is public, private, controlled, protected, or otherwise exempt from disclosure. Okay, so all records are considered public. We already talked about that, unless there's a reason why it shouldn't be. And let's go into some of those reasons. A private record, private is kind of like what we talked about with the building permits. Private information is a resident's email address, a resident's phone number. Those are private. What else do we have in there? Well, sometimes home addresses are, but if those are on building permits or not, home addresses too are public information. You can go on a county website. Government collects a lot of information on residents because of just the nature of business, because of the utility bills and things like that. So we do have their social security numbers. We do have information on them that is not to be released to the public. Controlled information, private and controlled information are about individuals. So controlled deals more with medical, psychiatric, records like that. We as cities don't normally have a lot of that, but there are entities out there that do. That type of information cannot be released to the public in general. Controlled, okay, so exemptions would be anything that's pursuant to a court rule or a federal or state statute. So there's some things that trump, what we consider private, controlled, and protected. If you look in the code, if you look in the materials from the archives, right now they protected records, they have a list, and I think it's like 80 something things that they list on there, and it grows, because I can remember a couple of years ago it was 60 something. So they keep adding more and more things to the protected list. So it's good to stay up on that. And if you're not sure, call the archives, research it, call me, just double check. But again, it's really important to just keep your city manager, your council in the loop when you're doing a denial. Okay, move on to designation. You're not required to classify any records until someone asks for them. So like I said earlier, you don't have to go through, don't feel like you have to go through your whole thing and classify, because you don't. Once somebody asks for it, then you have to evaluate it, and you have to give it a private, controlled, protected, or if it's public, the whole thing goes out. Also, records may be redesignated or reclassified, because sometimes, and let's talk about an example of a draft. Drafts are not open to the public all the time. A draft, like your notes that you take when you're doing council meetings or whatever, or that, those are your personal notes. Those are considered draft. But or your draft minutes that are just out there, the city council is going to approve them. But a draft can't stay a draft forever. So there's some things in the law, so you can't hide behind, oh, this is a draft, it's protected. So records can be reclassified. So while it's a draft, it might be protected, but once it's approved by the city council, that makes it a public record. So just be really careful and try not to, especially with drafts, to pretend like everything is protected, because it's not. You always kind of have to go on the side of the public, because if you go to mediation or whatever, they usually will try to take the public side, unless it is clear that it's private and they cannot have it. Segregation of records. Okay, segregation actually means redaction. And if you've never done a GRAMA request before, redaction is the part of the record that you're taking out. So like, let's use the building permit again. I'm going to redact out the personal email and the personal phone number. And so here's an example of what redaction looks like. I like to use, when I redact on a form, I like to use like a grayish, or you could use black. I don't like to use white. I like to be very clear to the requester what information has been taken off of this document, so they can clearly see it. It'll raise questions in that, but if it's classified correctly, they're going to know exactly what they can and can't have. Like, this is an example of an invoice from a law firm. And I've had several of these over the years, and our attorney-client information is protected, because it's potential litigation and things like that. So if you look at this, they're not really getting much information. They're getting who the person was, what the dates were, and then all of the stuff that's redacted are like people's names or cases that are going on or potential litigation. And yes, they can see the amount because this is what my request was for. They wanted to know how much money we were paying the attorneys. But again, I can't give out the protected information. So sometimes you can actually even redact so much that the record doesn't even make sense. So you probably shouldn't even be giving it the record. If you have to redact the entire thing, then just say the entire document is classified as protected or private. So in the law, it does say that the requester has the right to come in your office and inspect this, but just because it says that, you have to make sure that you have redacted out the private, controlled, protected information, because you'll get requesters that say, well, it says right there in the law, I have the right to inspect this. It's like, yes, you do. But I also have by law the right to segregate or redact the information. So again, if it's like in this case, there's not much information, but the person was just asking for the dollar amounts. So I felt comfortable doing that. And then another thing too is when you redact things, you have to let people know why. So like on every single line in this example, it was attorney-client privilege. So it was protected information. But what I do if it's a huge GRAMA request is I actually do a log and I let them know this one was for the mayor and council emails from this certain amount of time. And so this log has everything that I took off, I redacted. And so they have the subject under the description, and then I go and check off the box of saying why it came out, like it was protected or it was attorney-client or if it was private information and that. So that way, if you have a long, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of emails, this one, every time something got redacted, there's a reason why. It's a lot of work, but then that's why we get to charge when we do things like this. So I don't do this kind of a log for every single request, but I do it for the larger ones because it's just simpler to copy and paste and just put it in there. If it was just like, for example, that data construction company that does the building permits every 2 weeks, I just copy and paste the same email saying that information was redacted because it's private. And then I put the paragraph in there, how to appeal. So you don't have to do a log for every time if every single reason you redacted was the same reason. I know that doesn't make sense, but it does. Is there a question there?
Just asking if taking tons of redactions on email communication with GRAMA, will you share this log of PowerPoint?
Oh yeah, they just were asking if the PowerPoint, yeah, it's on there. And my contact information will be on here too. So if you want other examples or whatever, I'm happy to do them, because fortunately or unfortunately, over the last 12 years, I've gotten a lot of GRAMA requests. So I've gotten pretty good at, how to respond to them. This next section here, the oh,
I have a question for you, Colin.
okay, another question.
Can we put that redaction log rather than just the presentation? Can we put it in the forms
Oh, okay.
on the UMCA website, and that way it'll come up?
Okay, so she wants to know if we could just put the form. Sure, we'll work that out with our UMCA board. We'll work, put some workable documents on there that you guys can use as examples. Okay, confidentiality claims. This has to do with like if there's a trade secret. We don't normally deal with that, but the time I deal with this a lot is during the bid process. If like a company has put in writing, because we all deal with the same companies. Let's just take garbage, for example. There's 2 or 3 or maybe 4 companies in this whole state. So when they're in the bidding process, there's a few of them that'll say, write down like I do not want this out there to the public if anybody requests this, because it's unfair advantage, because they're all bidding for the same thing. So just if you get that written claim that they're saying it's confidential, then you have to respect that. So if somebody asks you for it, then just say, at this point, I can't. Now, after your bid's closed and everything's, you know, done, the contract signed, then that can become a public document. So you just have to respect what the company or person is telling you, and just know they have to tell you that when they are providing you that record. So say, for instance, they give you their RFQ and then they find out 20 other things, and then they come back 2 weeks later and say, oh, I want that written, whatever. By law, they're supposed to give it to you when they provide you with that record. But because that happens so often, I'm really leery when it comes to RFQs and whatever. So I will actually call the company and say, hey, I got a request for this. Are you okay with this information being released? Only just because I don't want to be in the middle of that mess. But you don't have to. They just have to tell you at the time they turn in the document. Okay, and then records are made public after 75 years. The reason that is because they pretty much assume after 75 years, whoever, hopefully you're not still alive and still dealing with the same record, but I don't know. I would hope you'd be retired on the beach somewhere instead of, you know, having records about you. Okay, we're going to move on to the appeal section. And I'm going through this stuff really fast. There's a lot of information here. And again, you can go on Archives website. They have some videos that go over most of this information. And then they do have their training manual and stuff on there. Now, on the definitions in this appeal process part, on the certification test, there will be some of these definitions on there. So be familiar with them. And again, remember, it's open book, so you can search for it if it's in there. Okay. If somebody does not agree with you that you redacted something, they can appeal. And we've already given them the language, how they're supposed to do it. So they're going to appeal to the head of the government entity within 30 days of the denial. If it's longer than that, too bad, too sad, you're too late. So your chief administrative officer needs to respond within 10 business days for a normal one, 5 business for an expedited one. If they don't respond, it's considered a denial of the appeal. So pretty much, you know, keep on your chief administrative officer. They're pretty good. Mine is, it's like, we just want to get it off the desk as soon as we can. And then another thing about this, this exam, this certification test that we take, you have to pay attention to some things say business days and some things just say days. So we already talked about the business days. That's when your office is open for business. But if it says days, then that's calendar days. And it's weird. I wish they would make it uniform, but sometimes it says days, sometimes it says business days. So you need to pay attention to that. Okay. Okay. Standards for release of certain enforcement and litigation. So your records officer can actually trump you if they get this this appeal or whatever, and then they talk to you, and then they can say, no, I think it's okay to give it, and that type of thing. So you don't really want to get into that too much. That's why it's better to be on board with your city manager or whoever and your council. If you know you're going to deny something and you know that it's probably going to be somebody who's going to appeal it. You don't always know that, but just know that your decision can be revoked, and that goes the same for if you end up going to the state, either your local appeals board if you have one, or your state records committee, because the state records committee will go and look at it. They'll do the hearing, and then if they decide that no, you probably should have given them the record, then your decision gets trumped and you have to supply the record. So appeals can be tricky. So that's why it's just better just to be on the up and up, stay in touch with them, and just do what the code says. I pretty much use the same wording on every single response that I send out. So it's clear every single time and you don't have to worry about doing it different each and every time. Oops, I went too far. I'm supposed to still be in green. Okay, the other option besides your local appeals board and the state records committee is they can actually go to district court and bypass all of those. So, it just depends on how you're set up or who the person is. I personally haven't been involved in any that have gone to district court. I don't know of anybody who has, but like I said, I've gone to the state records committee several times in the past 10 years. Okay, let's move on to module 5. This is believe it or not, the judiciary and the legislature and their staff offices are pretty much exempt from GRAMA. Isn't that nice? They give us all the laws, but they're exempt from it. So that's basically what this part of this module is, just to point that out. They're exempt from some and pretty much most of the requirements of GRAMA. They're not subject to the appeals process. So they will never be going to the state records committee in that, and they are responsible for the retention of their own records and that, so they don't even follow the state retention schedule or whatever. So if you don't want to do GRAMA requests, you get a job over there. Okay. Political subdivisions may adopt their own ordinances for their retention schedules. My city did this in 2016. That was around the time when the state archives started revamping, and they took the municipal schedules and combined them with the state schedules and all the entities together, and they're have one huge retention schedule. And it was getting really difficult to find things in that. So we decided as a team that we were going to do this process where we were going to go through, write our own retention schedule for our own specific records, which is perfectly legal to do. The requirement is that you pass it by ordinance, and then you have to get it to the state archives within 30 days. So it's a lot more work than just those few words, because it took a couple years to do that. And our city council adopted it, and we sent it through, and our city does not have to follow the state schedule because we have our own. Now, exemption or if, say for instance, and I did this, and we just recently amended it, we discovered over the years since 2016, there was a couple records that, oh, we didn't put that in our retention schedule and stuff. So we waited, and just this couple months ago, we did another ordinance amending our retention schedule to add these 3 records that we just skipped over. I think one of them was a new record that we never had. And so we did the same process. You just bring it forth to your city council, you adopt it by ordinance, and then get that to the archives within 30 days. And then they keep that in their records, and we don't have to abide by their schedule. Now, if there's something like I don't have in my schedule that all of a sudden I have a record, but I haven't adopted it, then I have to follow what's on the state schedule. But we were pretty thorough, and we went through and we adopted our own. So kind of nice, because I was looking on the state retention schedule the other day just to find something, because somebody asked me a question. I don't even know my way around that anymore, because I haven't used it since 2016. So I feel for you guys. There's a lot of information there. Okay, last module. Can we believe we're almost done? I like this because this is not the most exciting topic in the world. Okay, so other provisions in GRAMA, creation of the State Records Committee, and there'll probably be questions about this on your test. Again, open book. So the State Records Committee was created so that appeals, the residents, citizens have a way to be heard. So they bring their lawyer, you bring your lawyer, and then they give you 20 minutes to state your case. And then they deliberate, they ask questions, and then they decide yay or nay, you did it right. So again, not a fun place to be. It's very nerve-wracking, but I'll tell you this, each time we've gone, we've won. So, you know, it's only because if I'm going to deny something, I stick to the letter of the law. And, you know, it's like you can't lose that way. And there's been several times where I've called Rosemary and just ran things by her before I, you know, whatever. And she would say to me, she goes, oh, that's funny because your requester called me an hour ago. Asked me the same thing. So it's like, it's kind of weird. So anyway, the State Records Committee's there. Let's see. The next one says collection of information and accuracy of records. Oh gosh. It says this provision identifies the rights of individuals about whom data is maintained, outlines how records can be amended, and explains that records must be maintained according to approved retention schedules. Government has a responsibility to ensure that the information it maintains about the public is accurate and ensure that the public has the means to identify and correct, if necessary, that information. And then remedies goes on to talk about, it defines criminal penalties and liabilities, and that I don't even remember outside of on this module, outside of questions on the State Records Committee, I don't remember them having questions about the other things. That's probably just things they have to have legally in there. Okay, so the State Archives, again, recently has been doing webinars. So there's some webinars up there about classification, appeals process. They also have webinars on other things dealing with records management, and that, like next week, I'm signed up for one that's going to talk about cleaning out your share drives and things like that, or managing them.
So are those webinars on their website so you can watch them at any time, or do you have to be there while it's live?
Okay, so she asked, do you have to be there while it's live and sign up for it, or can you watch it later? Well, you can watch them later, because the other day I watched one that was on the classification that Rosemary Cundiff did, and I didn't sign up for it. She did it in August. And so their webinars are usually 1 hour, and they'll just talk about it. And they do the same thing. They do it through Zoom or whatever, and they have, you know, people can ask questions in the same way that we're doing. And they're up on their, probably under their training things. And again, like if you get there, if you're on their email list, that's how I knew about these, because they sent it, oh, here's the link to the one that we did on appeals. So you click on that, it pulls it right through, and theirs are all broadcast via they put them on YouTube, their YouTube channel. So there's a lot of information there. But again, you can go on, and there's an entire training video about this certified records officers test that we have to take. But I basically, what I do is I will have on one screen, I'll have the information up, on the other screen I'll have the test questions. And then if it's, you know, because a lot of times they do the multiple choice and it makes you think about it. And so then you have to go and, you know, watch the way that it's worded in that. But as long as you get 75% or higher, you're good to go. The other test that they have, the one about records management, is less questions than the GRAMA one. But I like to take the GRAMA one every year just to make sure I'm up on it. So anyway, I know we're early. It's only been barely an hour and there are not that many questions. So again, we're going to put this on the website. That's my phone number, my email. If you want examples, I'm happy to talk to you, send them to you. And again, we'll do something on the form section of the clerk's website so we can have more examples available.
Okay, we have a question.
Okay, question.
Our police department has recently done the records retention for police reports. They have everything filed according to the schedule. The retention just changed dramatically for certain reports. Does everything have to be redone according to the new schedule?
Okay, so they're talking about, did they adopt their own schedule?
No, they updated all of their files.
Okay, they
To the
updated their.
state.
Okay,
And then the state made a bunch of changes, so we had
Oh.
to go redo everything.
I cannot answer that. That's probably a Heidi Steed, because they're the record analysts over there. And I apologize for that, but I don't have to deal with them because I have my own retention schedule. And fortunately for me, our city contracts a police department, so I don't even have to do our police records. But I mean, I already get 5 GRAMA requests a week, so I couldn't even imagine if we had a police department.
The police secretary takes.
Yeah,
care of those
yeah, because
things.
pretty typically in cities, especially if they're bigger, there's somebody in the police department is also a records officer. And know this, it doesn't just have to be you. There can be other departments, like if you have a really busy building department, you can have somebody in that department be certified. If your police department or your fire department gets a lot of them. So it doesn't only have to be one. But again, make sure that you just stay up on that and get your certification every year.
There is one comment.
Okay.
The question also when you take the test, she's saying that the question also give you the reference in the code, so you don't have to look through the entire GRAMA code to find the answers. It's always there in parentheses. You can click on it and
Okay.
review it as you're taking the test.
Okay, that's good to know. I don't know if your volume's on or if they heard that or not. Okay. Okay, so if there's no other questions, I'm good to go. You know, this is a lot of information. It's probably take you more time than this to even take the test, but again, just be familiar with the documents that are out there and just know you're not, we're here to help you.
Just a, are we still on?
Thank you, Colleen.
She's got another question.
Oh, do you have another question?
Is there another question?
There's 2 things on one.
Okay. We have another question. It says, what kind of requests do you receive that had to go to the State Record Committee?
Oh, okay. A lot of them are police records that go to, I just did. Okay. Okay, so the kinds of appeals that go to the records committee, mostly the press, the news media wanting information that's been denied. A lot of times police records go there. Records about personal, like I saw on there, because you can go on the state records website, that's through the archives, and you can look up their cases. A lot of it is prisoners who are looking for information. People that are incarcerated want to, have information that they can't have. Another recent one was that young lady that got murdered at University of Utah, and they were asking for information on that. So, some things that really, it is protected information. So that's why you have to be really careful.
The part about all of these cases being on their website, because you will need it.
Okay. And all of these cases, you can go on their website, on the archives website under State Records Committee, and the ones that have been decided, it even tells you the decision, what they were instructed to do. So it is kind of interesting. And then you can, even if you're really that interested, you could go on there and you could follow, you can sign up to have an email every time they put out their agenda. And so you can know what's on there. I can tell you the only times I've gone have been when I've denied information on what the mayor and the council were talking about, because some of that is private and protected.
Yeah, so I have GRAMA request right now that's waiting to hear back if they're gonna pay the fees.
Mhm.
And my assumption is the requester can take as long as they want. They don't
Mhm.
have a deadline.
Okay,
for
so,
that. I'm just letting
yeah,
you-
she's waiting to hear back if they're gonna pay the fees or not. And I've been in that situation before, and I pretty much use the 30-day rule, like they have 30 days to appeal. So after 30 days, if I haven't heard, I'll send them an email saying, just want to let you know, 30 days has passed, I haven't heard from you. If I don't hear from you within, I usually say 30 days from now, I'm gonna close this. You know, because I don't want to be too harsh.
Well, that's if we're just waiting to hear if
Yeah,
they're gonna accept.
Because
the
there's
fees.
nothing in the law that says
Yeah.
a time frame.
And that's what I thought.
So, you know, it's just
It's throwing it
reasonable. I mean,
around.
there's been times where people ask for a record that you pull because it's just right there. It didn't even take you 15 minutes and then they never come and pick it up. So I'll just let it sit for a couple weeks. I'll notify them if I don't hear them back, then I just put the records away. So always. Okay, are we good? Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. This is the end of this session, and we'll see you this afternoon. Have a good lunch.